Welcome to Leadership Unlearned and Reframed. In our space, in our world, when we speak about leadership, we are not only speaking about a role in an organization, we are inviting you to take up your leadership mantle wherever you are. Consider a family needs a leader. That could be you. It could be on your local football team. It could be in your places of worship. There is something innate in you that is called leadership. And that is what we want to ignite on this program. A lot of us have learned about leadership and we've learned it from certain constructs. And so in this program, we are unlearning those constructs of leadership. And so because we're taking away, we are reframing so that we offer you a new thought, a new perspective, and sometimes a question or a discussion. So we're really happy to create this space for exploration and inquiry. And today we have with us Clare Stafford Taylaur. And so Clare is the CEO and co-founder of Conscious Consulting. So welcome, Clare, to our space.
Thank you, Maxine. It's wonderful to have the invitation and to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So Clare, in this conscious consulting world, tell us a little bit about that and what do you do there? What are you hoping to create?
Sure. So the intention of conscious consulting is to create value for organizations through people, culture, and leadership. And when we talk about value, we think about value in three different ways. We think about it as financial value, we think about it as social value, and we also think about it as environmental value.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's a big piece, right? People, culture, leadership, those are big words. And one of the words I thought was really like, this one stands out is the word spiritual. Because what organization speaks about spirituality in its mission, in its vision, in its objective? So how do you weave that notion of spirituality into practical leadership?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think when we talk about leadership, we talk about conscious leadership. So using our whole selves. Um, and so that's our intellect, our embodied knowing, our emotions, and also our intuition. And so it's this idea that there is something beyond, our physical body and our emotions that we can also take inspiration from, we can also gather data from, and we can also attend to as we're leading. So that's how we do it quite practically.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, I'm putting my accountant hat on. So I'm an accountant by profession as well, for people who don't know that. And I'm just thinking, in my previous life, if someone came to me and said, oh, we're going to deal with your emotions, no problem. I know emotional intelligence is a thing. But when you start talking about my intuition, I want to run for my numbers. And a lot of times I work with like engineers, and they only feel comfortable when I mention that I'm an accountant. Because we both have a
Mm.
scientific background, we both are accustomed to hard numbers. So how do you convince someone who has a strong technical background that what you're doing is worth a shot?
Yeah, this is a really good question, Maxine. And my history of work has also been with like logical left brain, so either like telecoms, IT, or investment professionals. So I'm very used to people who are most comfortable in the realm of hard data, right? That which we can, prove. Um, so when we're in these types of dialogues, if it's a one-to-one situation, very often those people have got to the point in their leadership journey where the logical, linear, rational approach has stopped working.
Hmm.
So they're actually looking for something different. So that's the first situation. And the second situation is, if we're looking at something like culture, we want to build culture as an organization. And then that's quite invisible and intangible, and like, where's your hard data? We actually have some metrics that we can use to measure the culture. So I think one of the big things that we do in conscious consulting is we take the intangible, invisible elements of either like leadership or organizations, and we make them visible and tangible, and we help people to start to work with them. But you have to be very aware of where is that person today and what's the next step for them. So, if someone has never thought about, why would I use anything other than like numbers in order to make a decision in a workplace, then I could ask them something like, tell me a time when you made a big life decision which went against rational thought.
Mm.
Because there's always times in people's lives where they make life choices that don't add up rationally. And it's something to do with their gut feeling. They're like, yeah, it just didn't feel right. That's intuition.
Mm.
So how can we more consciously give that some space so that rather than just saying, okay, this is what the numbers say, this is what we're going to do, we say, okay, this is what the numbers say, this is how we feel about it, this is like, when I reflect on it, when I sleep on it, this is what's coming up for me. There's maybe some discomfort here. Let's look a bit more there. Or I just know it's the right thing to do. And with experience, when you work with people, I don't know about in accounting or engineering, possibly less so, but certainly when you're working with investment professionals and traders, they actually use their intuition a lot because it's the product of experience. And they're like, yeah, no, this doesn't feel right. Those numbers, they don't feel right, because you can make numbers do anything, actually.
Yeah.
They're not always telling the truth, right?
Absolutely can. As an accountant, I can testify.
Right, exactly. Like, okay, you're going to trust the numbers, but you can make those things up.
Yes, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
and what I love about what you're sharing is, it's often the question about this nebulous notion. So there's a
Mm.
nebulous notion of culture, there's a nebulous notion of leadership, and really being able to break it down into something that can be measured, right? The old saying, if it cannot be measured, it cannot be managed. And so making it
Mm.
very tangible as you can. And what I'm also appreciating is the fact that you're using someone's lived experience to prove the point that you may not think of it like this, and in fact, you would have already experienced it. So that's kind of like what I'm pulling from what you're saying. Would that be accurate?
Yes, yes. And I think it's just about getting next to them, like being with them versus standing in opposition. And saying, like, I mean, you can joke with finance people that they can make up numbers, and they know that, and you can laugh about it, and then it's like, okay. And so then it's about that kind of partnership with, and saying, okay, so if we agree that data can sometimes be like true or false, then maybe we get some other sources of information, and we work with that, and we see what emerges.
Yeah, and I love the sense that, because very often we know consultants could come in and they don't necessarily join. So what I'm really hearing you say is that I am joining you where you are. Let's look at what we have. The data is what we have. And how do we recreate your experience in this nebulous space? So very much about your hair, this is what you're comfortable with. And let's use that to consider looking at this another way.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so I'm really interested in terms of, I love the term conscious consulting because, and I love it for two reasons. One, because it's deliberate, right? So I am conscious and aware of what I'm doing. And I would imagine by extension, the client. And then conscious because that conscious speaks to what we do not usually use or measure. So sort of like that intuition piece. So in your work, what have you seen around conscious, whether it's human conscious, whether it's leadership conscious? What do you define conscious as now after having the experience of your work?
That's a good question, Maxine. I feel like for us, it's about raising awareness.
Mm.
So this is the thread, like wherever we're working. So some of the work we do is like for HR professionals, because that's my background. Some of the work we do is for culture, again, because that's so closely related to creating healthy organizations, and then also for leadership. And so it's about helping people to see and and deal with, work with what they couldn't see before. Um, so yeah, really raising awareness. And then once we have that raised awareness, once we become more conscious, and I think the Carl Jung quote, which I put on the website because I love it so much, it's the one that says, to become more conscious is the greatest gift we can give to the world. So then for me, it transcends, organization and coaching or whatever it is, whatever engagement we're working on. It's like, okay, if we can come out of this project or meeting or whatever it is that we're doing, and we are all more aware than when we went in, then that's a gift. That's something that we've done. That's a good thing. And then the person or the leader or the organization, they're at choice, right? So now they have the addition, they have the information, they can see what they couldn't see previously. It's now visible and illuminated. And then it's about making a choice. So there's sometimes where we've gone into organizations and we've illuminated something, and the organization has made the choice not to make any changes. But that's okay, right? They're doing at least that consciously. Um, and then there's other occasions when we've gone into organizations and we've illuminated something, and the change has been so immediate, there's not really any need for a program. Right? So like, so they like, you show them, so you do the diagnostic or whatever it is that we're doing, and then usually we get together with the leadership team or the team, and we like reveal the results, and we do an offsite, and then afterwards there's a program, right, of like, intervention or whatever it is they decide they want to do, because they're the ones that choose what they want to do, right, in consultation with us. But there's been occasions where we've revealed, this is the output. And in that afternoon session, the team, like it's all kind of come out of, yeah, like, this is what we're doing, and this is why, and this is the history, and this is the context, and gosh, wasn't that painful? And they've just released it all. And then I've gone back and I've said, okay, so like, what's next? And they're like, yeah, no, we're actually fine now. I'm like, okay, that's great, So it really depends. And then sometimes it's a longer term engagement.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, Claire, because two things I'm taking away from this. One, there is amount of honesty in what you're doing. I think the old school consultants, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but consultant was sort of like where you keep the client interested and you keep the client along, and you work with a long-term client. And what I'm really hearing you say is shifting that narrative. If I go into a client and I raise awareness, then my work is done. And that acceptance of I may never get another dollar from this client,
Yes.
and I can trust the client is going to keep on doing the work or not. And whatever the client chooses is good for the client. So you have been an HR professional, you would have, that idea that within your job, you're seeing something start and you're seeing it to conclusion. And even working internally as an internal consultant in the HR field. So what sort of adjustments did you have to make, recognizing that a client raising consciousness may just be enough, and a client could say, okay, we don't want to do this anymore. How did you deal with yourself accepting that a client may just not come back?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, because I think this is the hardest piece, actually. Because creating a company and we create the company where we feel there's a purpose in the world, and it's in alignment, as you said, with our values, and to be of service. But equally, we create a company so that we have some financial income and some financial independence. Um, and this has been the biggest piece for me, actually, Maxine, because I know a lot of people that have worked in consulting before and maybe setting up independently. And this is always the intention, right, is to retain clients. Yeah, but that's not our model. And I can't say if it's right or if it's wrong, but it's where it is right now. It's where it is right now. And it's that I guess the inner work, right? If I look at myself as a leader, of acceptance of what is and not what I imagine it should be. Because I think at the beginning, when I started to do this work as a consultant, right, in-house, it was easy because I could just do the work along with my HR role. And people didn't really have a choice if they did not, because I was the head of HR. So I was like, we're going to do this culture survey, and now we're going to do this, and we're going to do this offsite. And so people were kind of, they had to come along. And I had to convince the leadership team, but that wasn't hard. And so then as an external person, it's a very different experience. And so at the beginning, I couldn't understand why everyone didn't want to do this work. Like, it was just a mystery to me. And then I sat back and I looked at it from a little bit further away. And I was like, not everyone wants discomfort. Not everyone is seeking truth, like, actually, like, dysfunctionality exists in people, in organizations, in family systems, because it serves a purpose. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there, right? It's benefiting somehow the system. And so me coming and saying, listen, I can get rid of all of this for you, is like, but they're like, no, actually, we're quite comfortable where we are. We like our dysfunction. And we're a little bit offended by the way that you think that we might want to lose it.
Yeah,
So this was the big learning.
I absolutely correct. I'm laughing because I share that experience. It's like I'm so passionate about doing this, and I could see the blueprint, and why is nobody following me, right? Yeah. And then so that's the tension that we hold, as independent consultants, whether you're a company or a solopreneur, and I guess different people who will probably work in different parts could probably identify with this as well, that there's this tension between I need to have clients to make some money, and I am going to let clients go where they go and serve them. And it takes a fair amount of integrity to stay in that place of I trust. I trust the universe got me, right? And I also trust that the clients who really want to take this journey with me will take it. And that the journey some clients have taken, that's enough for the client for now. And
Yes.
yeah, and I want to come back to something that you really spoke about, that idea that this dysfunction is serving the client or the client system. So whether, and that notion that sometimes people do not change because, we say in Trinidad, they like it so, right?
They
They like
do.
it so.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I want to spend a little time talking about that in terms of what you've seen in terms of people really happy with the dysfunction and not wanting to change it. What does the dysfunction look like, and how do people benefit from it?
I mean, the one theme that I'm seeing right now is like it's this gap between what I say I want and what I actually do.
Mm.
Right? Like, what is said and what is done, and there's a gap. And so what in Abu Dhabi right now, and the UAE more generally, there's this real, like, a lot of people are talking about healthy organization culture, and we really want this amazing culture. And a lot of organizations are moving from being local to global. So, the UAE has done a great job of building amazing local organizations. And now it's saying, okay, well, so you've built this great organization locally. Now I want you to go and take it internationally. And so people are saying, okay, but how? Like, how do I do that? And so that's where culture comes in, right? What are you building? What's the DNA of your organization? And so this is why people are interested in it. So they want to have a successful organization that they can take global. But then when we're presenting, okay, we can do this culture by design program, what's happening is, because the board of that company is mostly focused on financial results, then the culture piece is like less important. So much as like maybe the people in the organization, I think, yeah, this is a really good idea and we like this and we want this, the pressure from, let's say, the broader system is much more to focus on the financial returns. And, you know, you need to restructure, you need to reduce cost, you need to do all of these other things. When the culture workers sometimes feels at the beginning like the opposite of that. Like we're actually nurturing and we're investing and we're, you know, like we're kind of putting in rather than stripping out. But long term, and this is why we reframed this year actually around what we do, which is that we create value for organizations through people, culture, and leadership. So that by doing the culture program, your organization becomes more valuable.
Yeah.
You make more money and your company valuation increases. And so, but this is what we're seeing right now in terms of a theme is, yes, people want to do this culture work, but it's not a priority for their board, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think, Claire, I think that you really hit on something there, because I don't think it's you know, the UAE is going through their particular journey in terms of this from local to global. But that notion of shareholder value and driving that value is really the reason why I think a lot of companies are not interested in culture, because the return on the investment is not proven. You know, so one of the things that you said at the top, you know, the metrics and stuff like that. But I think and I love the way that you reframed what you're doing to put the word value in there. And I think the challenge would be, how do I show the return on investment of this financial cost? You know, what is that number? Is it a 10%? Is it a 15%? And what is the payback period? So my accountant is really just itching and saying, yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem.
Yes.
How do we convert these into hard numbers that we could really present to the board and say, you invest in your people and you will, in 2-3 years, you're going to get a 20% return on the investment. What it is reframed as lower absenteeism, lower turnover, because they're real costs for those things. So I've just given you my accountant consultant piece, you know, that around that in terms of what sometimes the board is looking for that sometimes we can't provide.
Yeah, and this is exactly where we're going, Maxine, exactly 100% where we're going. So at the beginning of the program, we meet with the CFO and say, okay, give us your current, you know, operating numbers, like what's your profit, what's your operating expenses. So we do that. So we get some kind of baseline at the beginning, and then we do the culture assessment, which also gives us a baseline, and we measure something called entropy, right? Entropy is wasted effort.
Yes.
Right? So say you've got 40% entropy, what does that mean of your and then you're spending like, you know, $100,000 on staff? That means that there's 40%, hello, Vincent, of that money that's being wasted, right?
Yeah.
So then you reduce your entropy and you increase your effectiveness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
Hello. He sometimes escapes his father when he's like looking after him.
Okay.
Yes.
Mommy, Daddy isn't even here.
Daddy's not here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
and
Mom said it's 2:20, but it's actually 2:30.
Okay. Can you go and find your dad?
Yeah, and tell him that.
You can say hi to Maxine. Hi.
hi, Vincent.
You did talk about leadership at home, didn't you?
Yes, you know, it's so for me, for this is what it is, right? And this is what it looks like for everybody else, because even when you're in the office and you have, you know, your family doesn't leave your mind. They may not be able to pop into the office and be there. But when we talk about, you know, so I want to just go back to the entropy a little bit, and how this interaction was so live and so valid for the point that you're making. Because in offices, we don't see people's families.
Mm.
and their families are there in their minds. And if it is that that there was an issue with your son and he came to report it, you would have left this conversation. So there's that entropy, in terms of everybody who's on the call, their effort of being here to see you. And then because you have a family, it's interrupted. And we could understand that because we can see it. But what about those people who are sitting in an office where we can't see them, or we don't even know how many kids they have? We don't even know their financial status. We don't know anything about them. We just know that they show up and we want them to be effective and efficient. So I just thought it was such a beautiful example of what we can see and what we cannot see, and how those things may be leading to the entropy that you spoke about.
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And then if we can, make the workplace culture healthier, and that looks different for every organization, right? So we're not saying like every organization should look the same, but the things that are getting in the way, so like, entropy is things like cost reductions, like over focusing on cost, overly bureaucratic, silo mentality, long hours. So these things that are kind of draining the people in the system. And then they have to almost work harder to get around these things. So if I come in every day and I've got 100% effort to give, but because I'm working around this entropy, you're only getting 60% out of me, and that's the same for everyone, then you're not running a successful company. I mean, maybe you are running a successful company, but think how much more successful it could be if we work to shift some of that and to create the values that the people in the company actually want, that they feel is going to take the company in the vision and in the direction of the vision and the mission. And then we measure it again at the end, right? So we do whatever it is that needs to happen. And then at the end, we do the same set of measurements and say, okay, like this is the difference. This is the shift.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, in terms of this idea of this refocus on, I want to say so many things right now, but let me start with the basic. It's almost like there's been an evolution and a devolvement of companies and culture. When you go back to the old management textbooks in the 80s and the 90s, it was all about cost cutting, right? It was about the globalization of companies, cutting costs, taking modules and putting them in different countries, all driven by cost.
Yes, it was like the Lean Six Sigma era.
Yeah, outsourcing and all those things.
Outsourcing and offshoring and all of these things.
Yeah, all those wonderful things. And then we saw a sort of panic, because what that did is that in some countries it decimated local industry, right? So they shipped everything out. So companies were no longer producing. And of course, that had a ripple-on effect in terms of national debt, etc. And so there was a sort of like a reorganization of that in terms of how do we maintain ownership? How do we maintain those things? And there was a small period, I think, in the 2000s where it is that this question of culture that you're talking about was really recognized and touted as, we need that culture. We need that culture. And what I've been seeing is that, especially after the pandemic, whether you believe it was real or not real, whatever your thoughts are, that's not the issue. I've found that after the pandemic, there has been some sort of shrinkage in thought and some sort of shrinkage in really paying attention to some things. And I don't know if it's driven by the losses made during the pandemic or the recognition that, during the pandemic, we were able to operate with very little. So I don't know what is driving it, but I want to know, what are your thoughts on what I've just spoken about in terms of what was before and what you're seeing now?
Yeah, I think the pandemic is like, we still talk about it, don't we, as this like watershed moment. And I don't think any of us came out of it the same way that we went in. I think it really shifted us. And in some of it was good and some of it was not so good, but it's definitely we noticed some big shifts. I think people
there's some
during the
yes. I can hear you. Yeah, go ahead, Claire. I think I can hear you.
Okay. That's okay. Yeah, I think we coped, during that period. And for some people, it was like a positive thing because they got to be more working from home. Some people, they don't actually like working from home. And so it actually wasn't so good for them. Um, and in some cases, people's mental health really suffered. The isolation, the social isolation was really very difficult for them. Some people reconnected more with their family. And so I feel on the other side of it, what I've noticed is that people want to have more agency over like how and when and where they work. And organizations some have become are more progressive and some are more fixed in how much they want to enable that.
Yeah.
And then I think there's also this generational shift as well, where the generation that's entering the workforce now also don't want to be dictated to. I think I come from a generation, and you're from a similar generation where we were just dictated to growing up. You just you kind of do what you're told, right? And then like at a certain point you start to question that of, was that right, whatever, but you kind of break free a little bit. We do this unlearning and all this work on ourselves. But the generation that's coming in now, they haven't had this, right? They're just like, no, this is how we want to work, this is how we want to be. We want to have some aspect of purpose, and they're mission driven. They care a lot more about like the environment and social issues.
Yeah.
I think before the focus from work was much more like economic, purely economic. And so I think all of these contextual factors are adding into, where we see work now, and how leaders approach this, and how much of it they embrace versus kind of stick to their old patterns is interesting, right? I mean, it's a choice. It's a choice how much you engage with what's emerging and how much you say, actually, this is the direction we said we would go in, so we need to stick to this.
Yeah. And it's and I guess the word just comes to mind, the tension, right? Because it's a tension I think because it's for someone. So when you look at the board of directors for most companies, they are not alphas, right? They're probably not even Z's. They're probably older. Yes, you have some startups and stuff that might be millennial led, or they might be some Z's will have some startups. Such a difference. I mean, I am heartened by the alphas and their drive for social and their really interest in their passions. And I have seen with clients where it is that it's causing major tension because the space is not set up for the collaboration that they want and they need. The space is not set up for, okay, let's redo this process. It's about, this is the process that works. This is the process that drives efficiency and effectiveness. And we want to get our product out by X date. So it's really like a rumble that's happening. And it's difficult for a lot of people to deal with. So what have you seen in your work?
Yeah, I mean, so what I would go back to here is one of our partners that we partner with in conscious consulting is called CRF, Corporate Research Forum, and they do a lot of research in this space. And they have they've done so many papers, but the one that sticks out for me is about reskilling and upskilling, and actually like with the AI that's now come into organizations, and it's here, people are like, oh, we need to prepare for it. It's like, it's actually already happened. And the willingness of people to adopt it. And so, you have a generation coming in actually that's already adopted it.
Yeah.
But you have a generation that's there that has different capacities to adopt it. But either way, they have to. And so, for me, it's the reskilling and the upskilling, because if you think about the environment, which you talked about before, is changing significantly, like the term that comes to mind is VUCA, you know, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, which is what we studied together.
Yeah.
How do we lead in this VUCA world? How do we facilitate through this VUCA world? The ability to learn is a competency that organizations now need to hire for. And as people, as humans in organizations, this is a key competency. So it's, you know, whatever technical skill that we bring, that ability to learn is what differentiates us and what enables us to have longevity within our career. So that's what I'm seeing. And that's also what the research is saying.
Yeah. Yeah, so that changes a lot of stuff, you know, and I'm marinating that. And as I think about it, I'm just gonna invite our participants, if there's anyone who wants to, anything that was said that really landed on you, or that you have a question around, or you just want to make a statement about, feel free to jump into the conversation. You can either raise your hand or unmute yourself and just enter the space. So I'm gonna leave I'm leaving room for you to enter. Anybody has any questions or comments? Not right now. Okay, great. And so feel free, if you want to jump in or put something in the chat, feel free to do so. And then, you know, and Claire, this whole idea of learning, I think it's so relevant, because we have been hiring for skills. And learning is not, there's no degree called learning, right? There's no degree called learning. There's no certificate that says you're a learner. And we've been hiring around stamped and approved skills. So, you know, you could get a certificate in AI, you know, you could show that you have AI skills, but that notion of learning, and I think that's so important because learning happens formally and informally. We've all learned how to behave, right? And then, as you said, you said that, you know, we each had to go through a process, especially people in different generations would have had to go through a process, and that process most likely was internally driven around unlearning and getting new reframes and really picking up different things in terms of how we want to be, how we want to live, how we see the world, what the world is like. And I'm just reflecting on the conversation we're having before we started around the name changes. You know, and I think that's, I think I want to invite you to share that with our audience as an example, just a simple example around learning and unlearning and how it happens. Would you be opposed to that?
No, I'm very happy to do that. Thank you, Maxine. So you want me to talk about why I haven't why my name is structured the way it is?
Yes, absolutely. I think
Yeah, of course.
of learning, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I was born as Clare Stafford, and then I got married first of all when I was around 30, and then I separated from my husband at 35. So I had taken his name first, I'd lost Stafford, and then I came back again to Stafford. So the funny thing was actually in my organization, when I got divorced, people were congratulating me because they thought I got married. Sorry, it's quite funny. And I was like, I mean, you can actually congratulate sometimes people when they get divorced because it's you know, depending on what's happened, it's sometimes quite a positive event. And so then I was Clare Stafford, and then a few years later, I met my husband, Kevin, and you know, we got married. But I was like, I don't want to lose this name again, right? It's like it's part of my identity. And then I learned at the same time that there's the women in this region where I live, which is in the UAE, they keep their surname irrespective of if they get married. Like, so if you're born with a name, that's your name forever. Like, you don't change your name to your husband's name. And you were sharing also that in South America, I think also in Spain as well, they add the husband's name. And so I thought, okay, I'm keeping my name, but my husband's family, they all have the tradition of they take the wives would take the husband's name. So I wanted to also take his name. So I was like, okay, let's just do this where I keep Stafford and then I add Taylaur.
Yeah.
So that was my unlearning of, you know, what I was taught growing up and embracing of something different that suited me.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked you for that is because that's a really tangible example of what we're asking companies to do. And
Yes.
and a real example of, when you spoke about companies that are local in your context and going global, there will be some shifts in terms of culture. That culture that they're holding on to, that culture that has brought them where they are, whether it's driven by economics or otherwise, when they transfer into different countries, there is a part of that culture that will change. And I'm saying this as well based on my experience, where
Right.
I've worked in as an accountant in global companies that resided in Trinidad. And
Mm.
our Trinidad culture is very much, we're friendly, we're warm, and we love a good party. And so there's a way in which we hold even the most serious issues lightly. We
That's
will work,
beautiful.
we will get through it, but we're not going to be like, we're going to be like, right? And we're going to work through it. And so there was an unlearning for a lot of the expats who came to work in Trinidad, whether they were from, especially the ones who were from the UK, because some of them had no idea that this place existed. They had no idea of the quality of life that we enjoy. And they really were seeing partying as probably something negative until they learned that it was a great way to relieve stress. So our culture, in some ways, absorbed and changed the culture that came to us of these multinational companies. It was quite different from when they worked in other places in the world. So I'm taking that idea of the conscious consultant, being aware of culture, supporting local teams that are going global. And I'm interested in how do you see that evolving for you and your team as you work with those UAE companies?
Thank you, Maxine. I'm with I wish I could go on a secondment to an organization in Trinidad. I don't think it would be a massive shift culturally for me. I feel like actually this is already me. I would feel very at home. Um, and yeah, I think it's the difference, and it's so interesting when you said, they have the companies, they have this culture, right? So culture exists whether we choose to attend to it or not. It exists.
Yes.
So then you have either an intentionally created culture, which is culture by design, or the culture that is just exists and has evolved naturally, which is culture by default. So culture by default is more likely to be the habits or the behaviors of the leader. Like it's more like individual personality driven. Which honestly, if you have a small company, it's fine. Like as long as the person is a good person, and has integrity and these things, then it's not a bad it's not a bad thing. Obviously, when that person leaves, then the successor will then determine the culture, right? So the culture will change. So that's your kind of culture by default model. But very often, if that leader, CEO leaves, people will leave with that CEO because they're like, no, I want to be with this person. It's not the company they're following, it's the individual.
Yeah.
So it's a bit more individually oriented. When we work with culture by design, what we do is we consciously create the culture of this organization that's going to take it on this next journey. So we have a couple of diagnostics that we use, but the one that we use most often is called the Barrett Values. It's Barrett Analytics. And so we do, everyone in the company takes the assessment, and there's 3 questions. So the first question is, of these 100 values, which 10 most closely describe your personal values? Second question, same 100 values. Of these 100 values, which 10 most closely describe the current culture of this company? Third question, same 100 values. Of these values, which 10 most closely describe the desired culture? So the culture that you want for this company in the future. So you get this kind of, real holistic, everyone inputs into this. So you see, okay, this is who my people are, and it's mapped onto their It's called the levels of consciousness model. But it's mapped onto that. So you can see like, where is your focus of awareness, right? Is it on financial? Is it on relationships? And it's the kind of like, it's like Maslow's model, but it's got a couple of extra levels. Like self-actualization is 3, basically. There's 3 levels of self-actualization. So it maps the values onto there. So who are your people really? What's your current culture? And then what's your desired culture? And so you can see this is what your people in your organization feel is the potential of the company. And then we can map those against what are your espoused values. So the espoused values is what's stated on the website. So this is what you say you are. This is what the organization's saying. This is strategically what you want to do as a business. What values are going to take you there? So you have your mission and your vision, which is kind of what you want to do, your big purpose statements. But the values are the how are you going to do it? Like what consistent behaviors of all people in this company are going to take us where we say that we want to go, where we intend to go. And this exercise, this exercise on its own just gives some direction. And then when the people in the company, when you hire them based on their values, right? So you have a set of company values that you know you need to become this global company. So you use it in your interview process, use it in your performance management process, use it for promotions, use it to reward people. So then it becomes integrated in the organization. So it's like really brought to life. And as long as you hold some consistency around that on an ongoing basis, like if you say, okay, these are our values, these are the behaviors, this is what we want to see, if people aren't exhibiting those and yet you still promote them because they deliver good financial returns, but not exactly how they should, like that's when you can run into problems, right? Because it's like, well, we say this is important, but actually, really, all we care about is that you're making the money and we don't really care about how you're behaving. So all of these things kind of matter. But that's how we would do it. So we take the input of the whole organization, and then ultimately it's the leadership team and the CEO who says, right, these are the values. But directionally, the assessment gives you most of what you need.
Yeah, I really love that, and the points that you made in terms of the espouse and the reality, and what's on the website, and those 3 pieces of data allow you to sort of track and map what's next. I also appreciated the notion that it must be tied up into all of your other systems. So how do we hire based on values? What do we promote as good performance based on values? And I can definitely see the tension around it. And because when you were talking about the default culture versus the designed culture, one of the things that I thought about is that very often a company has these overarching values and this is a culture, and each department head usually has a subculture going on in that team. So the fact that you're talking about performance and what is good performance needs to be values driven and needs to stay within that realm, that really helped answer the question about how do you eliminate these default cultures. And also the notion of this maximum leader who, when they leave, people leave with them because people are tied into their behavior or their own values that has created a particular culture for the team. So you answered my question. So thank you, Claire. I didn't even have to ask the question. You just sort of popped it out to my head. So I appreciate that. And that's really a little bit of conscious talking there. So Claire, I want to know about you as a practitioner managing. We saw that you have a husband. We saw that you have, you have some, you have
one of the children, yes.
One of the children, right? The other one was out of the room. And this idea of, so for yourself, in terms of managing your culture of your home, so it's like, it's okay. And where does that intersect, or how does that influence how you show up as a conscious consultant in terms of your business and your business model? Any impacts, or are you able to draw the Chinese wall per se, and a wall between the two, and it's two different people or interests? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think this has changed massively as I've got older. So
Mm.
when I was young, I remember I was like one person to my friends and a completely different person at work.
Mm.
Like to the point where when I went for my first ever job, like kind of formal job interview, my friend Lindsay, I reminded her of this actually in the summer. She said, I said, I'm going to go for this interview. It's like an HR consultant job. And she was like, okay. She said, you know how in interviews people tell you just be yourself? And I was like, yeah. She was like, don't. I was like, right, okay.
Good friend, Lindsay. Good friend.
Very frank. So I was like, right, okay. And I would wear like these serious suits and like I was very formal at work. And and then I think as I've got older, like the layers have kind of peeled off. And I've done, I think, so much more the inner work, I think has helped to like what you see on the outside is very much what's happening on the inside. Um, and and also I just don't have the time to put on different personas anymore. Like I just I just don't have the time. So like it's kind of like, okay, this is it. Like this is who I am at home, at work, with my friends. Like there's not different people coming depending on the situation. Um, and I think it's yeah, when I say getting older, it's like getting more comfortable with like who am I really, and letting that come out in every interaction. Um, and it was really important for me when I started conscious consulting because previously I was in a corporate role, which was really intense and I loved that job, honestly, but it was not compatible with having a young family. And even though the company was super flexible with me and I made up all my own rules because I was the head of HR, so I would take my son with me on business travel and stuff. Um, Even with all of that, like goodwill and self-imposed flexibility, it was still not sustainable when I was going to have Otis. And so creating conscious consulting, it was very important for me that the family had a place within the system. So they're not competing against each other. There's more of like a synergy and there's a balance, but not a balance in terms of like in that scales way. It's not a balance like that. It's like in the school holidays, so in summer and in December, like in winter, our winter here in the north, um, I'm with the children. Like the priority is the family. During the rest of the year, the priority is the company.
Mm-hmm.
And while it doesn't work exactly like that, and I do end up having to work over the summer and in December, and the children sometimes get sick and things and during the other times, but like generally, like I've kind of organized it like that. So if someone comes to me in June and says, okay, we need to kick off a big project, it's going to start in July. I'm like, is it possible for us to start a bit later? Like I'll negotiate with them and find a way that it can work around the family. And I think it's taken me some time to get to that place, not just to react and to run and be like, yes, like the first word out my mouth is yes. It's like, okay, like if you really want to do this work, then we can make it happen in a way that's successful for you and successful for your organization, but doesn't negatively also impact us. So we have to be like myself, my team, we also have to be in a good space in order to do the work well, right? Because it's as we learn in our Gestalt psychology time together, it's about self as instrument, right? So if you're hiring me and you're hiring my team, then we as consultants have to be in a really good space that we can really be of service. And so the other piece is we don't take on a lot of projects at once. And I've learned over time what is enough. I think there was one point when I took on too many things. And I felt it, Maxine, in my body. Like I just felt like I was going from one thing to another thing and then by the end of the day, like my head, it just didn't work anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's how we do it. But it's, it's imperfect, but by the way, so is everything. And so yeah, we make it work. And the idea also for conscious consulting is this is like a long-term project. This is not something that's like 3 to 5 years. Like this is something that's for the future. And so building it from the beginning with high integrity and good people and good projects and integrated it in a healthy way with life, right? With the family and family life is the most important thing.
Yeah. And Claire, I'm listening to you and I'm just thinking, OMG, how good would it be if organizations could really reorganize themselves, not around a process or a profit, but around their people? Because what you described there is, everybody who has a family, and that family could be children who you've birthed, children who you're guardian for, or somebody like me who their family is their friends, right? So what would it be like if we create organizations where we could work around people so that when people come to us, they're like giving us their most and their best because they've cleared their agenda for us. And so that is what I want to see in the future, right? And maybe it is that with the alphas, the way they want to work, the way they don't want to work, maybe we'll see something like that where the person becomes the center of the work and maybe not the organization. And that's a shift. And it's a huge shift. And I'm just really excited for you that you were able to shift it to really deal with you. And that whole notion of, okay, I'm not chasing the dollar. I am really here in service of my clients to make sure that when I show up, that they can get the best and the most of me as their consultant, taking them on this journey. And I would love to see that for a lot more people, especially those who are employed. I mean, people who are freelancing or have their own companies, regardless of scale, there's a lot more choice. People who are employed in that 9 to 5 structure, I think I want to see that happen for them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it will happen.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's happening anyway, but because we're in it, we can't see it. But I think what in 20 years, when we look back, I think companies will work in a whole new way. I think it's going to be a lot more networked, a lot more around like, yeah, people's lives and how they want to live and then they can bring their best selves to work and be really of service in the workspace, which people ultimately they want to do. Yes, they need to make money, but they also want to feel like they're being of service. Like these two things are really important in work.
Yeah, and I love it because it's moving to a space of co-creation and collaboration that's really big now. And this idea that I don't have to sacrifice my life. I don't have to delay my gratification. I mean, it's like all, and I love it because personally I never believed in delayed gratification, but that's a pet peeve, and this is not about me. So but a lot of those ideas that were so rigid, and that all the concepts of, do well, I call it the heaven concept, right? So take the pain now because you will get to heaven, whatever that heaven is, whether delayed gratification or whatever. And we've seen where it is that rigidity didn't really serve us. It served a number of other things, but it didn't serve the individual. And so coming full circle where it is, and I want to be clear, it's different from the individual competing, but for the individual being able to give up themselves and to be there to collaborate with other people. And I love that notion and that shift because I'm excited by that shift actually. So you called it, Claire. 20 years from now, we have the Claire effect coming into effect, and we're all looking forward to that. So Claire, as we move to wrap up, I want to do 2 things. I want to thank you for your time here today. I want to acknowledge our participants and really welcome them into the space. We do this once a month. So if you were here, just drop your email into the chat, and I will privately invite you to our next session, where we'll have another leadership consultant, a leadership specialist, a Gestalt specialist who will come in and share their perspectives about the world. So if you found this interesting, or you could also follow me on LinkedIn. You could also follow Clare Stafford Taylaur on LinkedIn. We're both there, so you won't miss anything. Thanks, Felicia, for putting in your email. I will definitely add you to my list. So Claire, as we get ready to end this conversation, tell me, what are you thinking now that we've had this session together? What are you leaving with? And what do you want to share with as your last words with our audience today?
I mean, I had no idea what to expect coming into this conversation. And you said, okay, what do you want to talk about? And I was like, let's just see what happens. And I'm leaving the conversation grateful that that's what we did. And knowing that we can also do that in life. Like we can also trust that we have everything within ourselves, and we can trust that the people around us have that, want us also to succeed, right? That we have enough supporters around us, that we can just step in and allow it to happen. And so that's what I will be taking away from this experience. It's been wonderful, Maxine.
Yeah, it has been clear. And anytime you want to pop in and continue the conversation, I think, whenever it is that you have something new that you've learned or something you really want to share, feel free to pop back in. The space is yours as it is mine. So thank you so much for showing up today.
Thank you. I'm seeing some nice messages in the chat as well.
Yeah, you want to read them out for us so we'll have them on record?
Yes. So Victoria said, thank you. Kari said, this has been such an enlightening conversation. Thank you. Vandana said, brilliant conversation, Maxine and Claire. Thank you for sharing your perspective on living consciously in life and in organizations. May the new way of being happen. Best wishes to both of you.
Thank you, guys.
Rehan said, thank you, Claire and Maxine, for this insightful talk. Yeah. Sheikha says, thank you. Sheikha's also working on my team.
Oh, okay, great. So we have
we had some team members and some friends also that I recognize. So thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It feels like, I want to just feel like this conversation can go on and on. And yeah, Claire, I know you have your family and things to go to, so I really want to appreciate you again for showing up here.
Thank you. I need to go rescue my husband.
Yes, you absolutely do.
Bless him, coming home from work early and taking on the boys this afternoon. But you know what? This is what partnership is all about, right?
Partnership, that's what it looks like at times. So thank you very much. Okay, bye all participants. Lovely to have you with us. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Maxine.
You're welcome, Claire, and thank you.